And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as usual by my co-host, Mat Mlodzinski, and we are here with another edition of CBB Rank, counting down the teams from 100 to 1 until the start of the regular college basketball season, as voted by the committee on our site. Today, we're doing teams 60 through 56. Of course, if you have found our channel here on YouTube and you like our content, be sure to subscribe, be sure to support us, like this video, etc. Would really help us out. So let's get started. Number 60, we got UCF. UCF has had just one tournament appearance in the 7 years of Johnny Dawkins. So you kind of have to wonder how they keep keeping him around. But I will say, Matt, they have one of the more capable rosters in the Big 12 this year. That Johnny Dawkins has somehow built something that has the capability of being really, really good. I think they have to show something this year. I mean, you got Darius Johnson and Jalen Sellers. They both returned, both averaged over 15 points per game last year. And now you got big-time transfers. You got Keyshawn Hall from George Mason. That's a huge get. You got Jordan Ivy Curry from UTSA, another pretty big get. Dior Johnson and Mikey Williams are still rostered. Both are former top high school recruits. Both really haven't played much in their 3-4 years since being that top recruit because of off-the-court issues, but both have a lot of talent and are on this roster. Do you think Johnny Dawkins can piece this all together? Are you confident? Are you extremely skeptical?
Well, shout out to Ariel Butterman for writing this article and using the word polarizing. That very much sums up this UCF team. I think it goes without being said, you got a team with Dior Johnson, Mikey Williams, and Benny Williams. You don't really know what's going to happen this season, right? We know Dior has had some very serious legal troubles throughout his career. He's transferred in and out. The guy was going to be one of the top recruits in the country. And he kind of saw his college basketball career go before his eyes, but now he's back in D1. He's back in the Big 12, so we'll see how that plays out. The talent is there. Just everything else we don't really know about. Mikey Williams, of course, sort of the same story. And Benny Williams, a guy who at Syracuse had a lot of trouble, was sort of kicked off the team at one point, sort of a second time as well, and then was legitimately kicked off the team. And UCF said, you know what? Whatever, we'll take all these guys. We want the talent, and we're going to try to work with it. I'm concerned, Dan, because I don't know if Johnny Dawkins is the guy that's going to figure this out.
Yeah, I think he kind of just realized, like, I need a big season. I'm going to try to get that by all means necessary and take a major gamble. This could absolutely fall completely on his face, and if that happens, you know, he's probably out. And that was a very legitimate scenario anyway, but I think you got to look purely on upside if you're Johnny Dawkins. I think that was his reasoning in building this roster. Another thing about UCF, I mean, they were great defensively last year. They forced a lot of turnovers. They ran teams off the three-point line. But here's the thing, they do lose a lot of what made them great defensively. They lose two elite rim protectors in specific, in Ibrahima Diallo and Omar Payne. So as compensation, I think they will be, on paper, a really good shooting team, or a much better shooting team, I should say, because they shot only 32 and change from the three-point line last year. But Hall from George Mason and Rakas Jocius from LaSalle, Jordan Ivy Curry, even Debo Coleman from Georgia Tech, to an extent, all of them could shoot. It's really hard to evaluate this UCF team, but just a couple of tidbits on what we should be looking for.
Yeah, and before we close on them, I'm concerned too about the makeup of this roster. You have so many guards: Darius Johnson, Jalen Sellers, Jordan Ivy Curry, Dior Johnson, Mikey Williams. 5 guards for 2 spots, maybe a third if Johnny Dawkins wants to go small ball. And then you have very few forwards. You have Dallin Coleman off the bench at 6'6", 220. You've got Keyshawn Hall and Benny Williams. That's it in Ariel's, projected roster breakdown. 3 forwards. So seems very guard oriented. Seems like they're going to play some interesting styles of basketball. And you know what? Johnny Dawkins, if you want to take care of it, you go right ahead. I wouldn't want to be the coach in this system.
Yeah, well, we'll have to say he's definitely going to have to succeed in a different way than I guess he's approached the last several years. But I think that's enough on UCF. Let's move on. We got number 59, Boise State. They've been a pretty consistent program under Leon Rice, who's now in year 15 at the program. Boise State, they always seem to win 20 games. Their last 3 seasons have resulted in tournament appearances, so they've kind of risen along with the Mountain West. Of course, that'll be torn apart very soon, conference realignment, but for now. And then I think the big storyline is that they return a huge name in Tyson Dagenhart. Dagenhart averaged 17 almost points per game, 6.2 rebounds. Really efficient guard who will make his living getting to the hoop. I think he has that big frame that makes him such a dangerous, like, downhill player, but he also has the 3-point shot to keep you honest. He's just a tremendous player. Tyson Dagenhart is a potential Mountain West Player of the Year guy, and that's what's going to make Boise State so intriguing.
Yeah, and this was an article I took. I've always been kind of infatuated with Boise State. I think partly because of college football. When I was growing up as a kid, that's when Boise State was just real fun to watch. And so Boise State basketball has started to become real fun to watch as well. Obviously, Max Rice last season, but he is gone. So it's a little bit of a new Boise State team. But you hit it right on the dot, Dan. I mean, Tyson Dagenhart, you've got Omar Stanley, you've got Javon Buchanan, a guy who averaged 20 points per game in the NAIA. Also, I want to mention Dominic Parolin. I have him in my starting lineup. There's an injury. Some stuff hadn't really been disclosed. It was more like in the talk of what Boise State had been saying. There was a little bit that had been disclosed. I'm waiting to see there. I haven't seen any, and correct me if you've seen anything. I haven't seen anything that he will be out for the entire season. So I'm just kind of keeping that there. But the key for me for this Boise State team is Alvaro Cardenas. Boise State was outside of the top 250 in assists per game last season. He comes in from a very bad team in San Jose State, but he averaged 5.5 assists per game. I want to see if that really makes a difference on this Boise State team, right? Can they get the ball moving to some of their guys like Dagenhart, like Omar Stanley? They got to have a good point guard to get those guys going, and maybe he's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that assessment. I think it's going to be a very different orientation of an offense with, Max Rice. You wrote this, as great as he wasn't the best, like, playmaker distributor type. He was more of just like a, I'm going to do this, I'm going to create shots for myself type of guy. And Cardenas is the opposite. So that's intriguing. I think outside of Dagenhart and who's their center that you said?
Omar Stanley.
Oh yeah, sorry, name eluded me. But outside Dagenhart and Omar Stanley, it's really just a low major transfer of a flurry of low major transfers that kind of are going to fill out some key spots. You got also Dominic Priolo from Lehigh. He's probably going to run the wing. He's an experienced guy coming off of some injuries, like you said. But I mean, Javon Buchanan, I think that's going to be a big piece there. He's another big guard. That's what Boise State loves. They love their big guards, 6'6", 6'7". He put up real video game numbers. I mean, I don't have much to add. Like, I think this is going to be a Boise State the last, 3 years, they've been in between 8 and 11 seed, and I see nothing really to change in 2024 to 25. I think that's exactly what we're looking like for Boise State. So a little higher than our 59, I guess.
Yeah, and again, I'm trying to find anything I can on Dominic Parolin. I really just can't. I mean, I'm looking to see in live time if there's any update. Maybe my research needs to get better, but Boise State fans were telling me, hey, he's going to redshirt, he's not going to play. Taking their word for that, there seemed to be some legitimacy to it, but until I see a legit press release about it, he's a guy that other teams have to worry about too.
All right, number 58, we've got Pitt. Even though they didn't make it to the dance last year, I think it's safe to say that patience has kind of paid off with Jeff Capel, which isn't always the case with a head coach. When you enter a program 4 or 5 years, you don't do much. It's not always the case. Oh, let's keep it going, and we'll see results. But that did work with Jeff Capel and Pitt, in my opinion, because the last 2 years have been completely different. Even last year, they won games at Duke, at Virginia. They finished 30th in Torvik, so I think they were a team that was capable of not only making the tournament, but winning a game or two as well. Here's my question, though. Who's going to be the star of the show for this team? It's really hard for me to see when I look at this roster. In the past, they've had Justin Champagny. In the past, they've had Blake Hinson. Last year was actually Hinson and Bub Carrington, who are both gone. And it's hard to see somebody on this roster taking over that role. What do you think?
I'd like to think Ishmael Leggett will probably be the guy as far as like the leading scorer. Maybe if they need a bucket down the stretch. Jalan Lowe as well. He's going to have to make shots, but there's no efficiency here, right? It seems like this could be a team that's going to be chucking up some wild shots. I will say this. The starting lineup, for the most part, should have some cohesion, right? There's a lot of guys that Jeff Capel brought back. At that same point, sometimes cohesion doesn't really matter if you don't have stars from the year before.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden guys are thrust into new roles. So I'm with you on this. Like, I don't know what to expect from Pitt. I think they've got some good talented players, but you kind of need to watch a little bit about how they adjust to these new roles. They're going to be asked to do different things. And sometimes players thrive when they're put in that situation. Other times they don't. And so it's really a guessing game with the Panthers.
Damian Dunn, I think, is another intriguing guy. He gets an opportunity. He's projected off the bench, comes from Houston, was a star at Temple earlier. He was like a high volume, like efficiency type guy at Temple, but put up some big numbers. And that role just simply didn't line up at Houston. He just didn't get the quantity of shots that made him such a good player at Temple. But maybe we could see that a little more at Pitt, where offense is kind of needed. And if they need an offensive splurge, maybe it's Damian Dunn. I think of all the guys on this roster, maybe he has the biggest upside. Also, another guy who's a breakout candidate that they really need to break out is Guillermo Diaz-Graham, because anytime you have somebody who's 7 foot and could shoot, people will get excited, right? Like, that's just the nature of basketball today. That's what everyone's looking for, is guys with insane length that could shoot and be athletic and whatnot. But his lack of like a real solid frame, he's only 225 pounds, so he's a little, light. I want to say he's not physical enough, and even putting on weight, that's still been the case. And he's just overall been pretty raw the last couple of years, and I think that's kept him from being a real consistent player. Also, the fact that he's been playing behind, some stars. Now this year, he's really going to be asked to do a lot more. So that's a big storyline I'm keeping an eye out for, is the progression of Guillermo Diaz-Graham. Overall, I don't see what there is to love about this Pitt team, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, same here. I think they deserve to be in the top 100. I think that probably they deserve to be around 15 spots lower or higher, whatever, like in the mid 70s, because they seem like they have enough guys back, enough talent. But there's not really a deep bench, and there's not really, like you mentioned, a star in the starting lineup. So we'll just see what Jeff Capel develops this season.
Well, if we feel this way about Pitt, how do we feel about number 57 in our rankings, Missouri, who goes 0-18 in the SEC last year? And like I said, becomes 57th in our CBB rank. Now, really what we have to do in this segment is try to convince you, why are they here? Why can they be here, even if you don't necessarily believe it? Where is the upside? And I think the roster does look a lot better. I'll be fair. They got number 26 recruit Anor Boateng. They got number 69 recruit Peyton Marshall. They got number 79 recruit Marcus Allen. They all come in. They got Marcus Warwick, a record holder at Northern Kentucky. That's going to be a big addition in their backcourt. They got Jacob Cruz from UT Martin, a double-double machine there. They got Tony Perkins from Iowa. Like, they're getting a lot of guys. Plus, Dennis Gates is regarded as a good on-court coach. And you have to remember what he did in his first year. He went 25-10, made it to the round of 32. It's weird with Missouri because I think, let's just say we take his first season where he won 25 games and no one was expecting that. And then we take his second season where they won 0 games in the SEC and no one was really expecting them to be that bad. Maybe we'll say they're both outliers, and the real reality with this program, with this coach, is somewhere in the middle. And that's where I'm at with Missouri. I think they're probably like in the middle of those two outcomes.
I like that outlook. I also like what Dennis Gates is doing at Missouri, right? He said, you know what? We got to overhaul this roster. This is my third season at Missouri. It's time to make some change. You mentioned it right off the bat. They have 3 top 100 recruits, 2 more recruits that are inside, the top 170 or so. So they got 5 freshmen coming in to try and overhaul this program, get Missouri back to winning basketball games. And they also bring in guys for this season, right? You bring in transfers like Jacob Cruz and Marcus Warwick, guys that will score the basketball from day one. So I like, what Dennis Gates is trying to do. He's trying to bring in some people, some players this year that can help Missouri turn it around as much as possible. And he's trying to bring in some freshmen for the future. Now, will those freshmen have an impact right away? I'm not sure. I think Boateng's in a good spot because he doesn't really have to start from day one. I think, if you're Peyton Marshall, you're kind of expected to start from day one, and he'll have to adjust. But I think the key here is Mark Mitchell from Duke, right? You bring in a winner who played for a great coach, a great program. That can sometimes be a big difference. And I'm excited to see how Mark Mitchell does with Missouri, with a freshman center in the front court with him. It's an interesting pairing there, and I think it could surprise a lot of people this season.
And also don't forget about Tamar Bates returning. I wouldn't consider him just like, oh, he was the lead player. He was the best scorer on a bad team, so don't make much of it. Like, I don't think it's the case in this situation. That is often the case. But I think in the case of Tamar Bates, he's a really good basketball player. He is the main veteran returning on this team, and I think he's actually one of the better shooters in the SEC. So if he does happen to get more volume and be asked to do more, and he probably will just get better shots, I think his numbers will be better as a result. So, yeah, I 57 might be too high, but don't just say, oh, it's outlandish to put Missouri here because they went 0-18 last year. That's not the whole story. So, all right, number 56. McNeese. Will Wade has built a high major level roster in the Southland. That's basically how I'm going to put it. He's known for defense. That's how he is as a coach. But he has built an offensive unit that will just light up the scoreboard. You got Christian Schumatt, who is a little undersized returning, but a big, and he really dominates at that low major level. You got Kadir Copeland from Syracuse, averaged almost double digits in the ACC. You got Sincere Parker, who averaged nearly 16 points per game in the A10, albeit for a bad St. Louis team. You got Bryant Celebang from Arizona State, Brandon Murray from Ole Miss, Aylin Breed from Providence. Like, it's a loaded roster with guys, high major guys, and they're competing in the Southland.
Yeah, and there's no reason to believe that McNeese won't once again be one of, if not the best mid-major team in the country, because they've got a coach that's well-known. They won 30 games last season. And other than Shahada Wells, they don't really lose a whole lot of key players, right? They lost like 2 other rotational pieces that should be easy enough to replace. They bring back guys like Javon Garcia, Christian Schumatt. I mean, there's enough on this team. And I think you look at a guy like Sincere Parker running the point guard. I mean, he put up those numbers at St. Louis. You know he's going to do the same at McNeese. Quadir Copeland was probably the most underrated player on Syracuse last season. He really turned into a little bit more of a scorer and was arguably one of the most fun players to watch in college basketball. Just a very interesting basketball player, to say the least. Look, this conference doesn't matter to McNeese. What matters for them is how they will stack up once they make the NCAA tournament, because there ain't no team getting in their way in the Southland, not one. So it's, what are they going to do out of conference? It's going to be interesting. When this article was released, Dan, there wasn't a non-conference schedule, so I do want to bring that up so that people know who McNeese plays. They play Alabama, they play Mississippi State. They've got some other games against some other programs as well, but just so people know, they've got some power conference teams on their schedule.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because I think it's very possible. I don't want to say likely, but extremely possible that they go undefeated in the Southland. I mean, if you look at the Torvik projections, You got Stephen F. Austin, you got Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Those are solid programs, right? Not going to be in the top 100 this year. Everyone else is 200 or worse. So last year they went 17-1 in the Southland with a shocking loss somehow to Southeastern Louisiana. And that's what I want to bring up, because if we want to talk about McNeese State potentially getting an at-large bid, which is like you talked about their non-conference opportunities, you got Mississippi State, you got Alabama. That makes it a little bit possible, but it's just an uphill battle because you're playing, in the Southland. So one blunder and you're absolutely screwed for the whole season. But as long as you take care of business in the conference tournament, I mean, this will be an exciting team to watch. Maybe put them on the back burner for a while, just because they'll be blowing out teams by like 30 every night. But it's going to be that team that everybody like falls in love with as a Cinderella. Like, oh my God, look at me on the ball nowhere. I know like McNeese State's going to be that 12 seed, that 13 seed that, makes a run and gets to the Sweet 16 and all that. Like McNeese State's going to be that team. I could already say this. And they kind of were that team last year too, but I think they're even better in terms of roster this year.
Yeah, people started to know who they were last year. And if you know college basketball, you know who Will Wade is. So I think people already sort of said, okay, this team is legit. And this year, I mean, like you said, you know who they are. You know that Will Wade's probably going to get a job after this year if all things go well and move on somewhere else. The proof is in the pudding for McNeese.
All right. Well, that will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Be sure, like I said in the beginning, to subscribe to our channel if you have liked what you've heard. And be sure to check out our other episodes. We have counted down in increments of 5 from 100, and we'll continue to do that all the way until 1. Once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care.